there, this is Chris from Kilroy's Cartography. In this tutorial series, I'm going to take you through the various workflows we use to turn 2D maps into realistic 3D terrains for creating beautiful renders and 3D printable objects. The type of workflow you will use will depend on what your starting point is and how close to an existing map you want the results to be. Are you looking to start your world building journey? Or do you have an established world that you are looking to replicate precisely? Maybe you have the land masses planned out, but not the details. For this tutorial, there's a few pieces of software that we'll be using. I'll link the links in the description to all of these, but we'll be using Gaea and Blender to create these realistic looking terrains. And in order to create the inputs that we need for these programs, I'll look at two different workflows, one using Wonderdraft, if you're a Wonderdraft user, and then if you're not, an alternative using Photoshop. Here you can see a side-by-side image of the original and 3D version of Barovia. This map has contour lines, which we can take advantage of with a lot of tracing in Photoshop, get something very close to the original map. What these different approaches have in common is creating a rough height map to use as input into Gaea. A height map is essentially just a grayscale image, with low elevation represented by darker greys through to black, and high elevation represented by lighter shades. Once we've run this through Gaea, the output will be something like this, where we can see much more detail from the erosion. Here's another example. This time it's a world map. As a side note, I really enjoyed working on this commission. It's such a cool idea to have these large land masses floating in the sky. If you're interested in reaching out for a commission, I'll leave a link in the description. But this time, as you can see from the starting map, we don't have any 2D contours to trace, only symbols. And therefore, we're going to have to do a lot more kind of thinking and manual interpretation of the elevation changes. So in this video, I'm going to start with the easiest workflow and the one that I think gives the best results if you're starting out building your world. In an ideal situation, you would start with just a fairly basic flat landscape without the details already added, like the mountains and the rivers, and then produce these fully procedurally. This is what will give you the most realistic results. So if I quickly hop over to Gaea very quickly, you can see here that we have this flat starting point. We can add in some noise, and I'll go through this later on and how to do this in more detail. But essentially by just adding the noise, then simulating the erosion, then simulating the rivers through this eroded landscape. Just look how they seem to kind of navigate the terrain as you would expect rivers to do naturally, even with like little headwaters feeding into the main river here, and then eventually out to the sea that's not there just yet. But you can see how having this created for you rather than trying to trace something that's already there is a much preferable workflow. It's not the end of the world if you already have a map with rivers exactly where you want them. We have a workflow for that too, but this kind of gives you the nicest results. And same goes for the kind of the coastline, and then simulating where the trees would form as well. But getting ahead of myself here with Gaea, I wanted to first take a look at Wonderdraft. Now, here I've got a map already, but let's just discard this actually and create a new one from scratch. So a really key thing here for starting with a new map in Wonderdraft is to make sure you're working with square aspect ratio, 1:1 aspect ratio. And here I've chosen 4096 by 4096, as this is going to match the output render or the Heightmap render from Gaea later on. So we load up a completely new map. I'm just going to go to the Landmass wizard, select a continent, and generate. And here we can see that we've got this landmass created with the water around. And in Wonderdraft, you can affect the water level to kind of allow the landmass to kind of grow and shrink away like this. But the important thing to note here is that the actual height map here doesn't include the water. So we've got kind of information all the way down here from 0.01. This is the lowest areas all the way up to 1. And we can see that there's actually a fair amount of landmass still remaining at 1. And we will see that later in Gaea as a kind of a flat spot on top of the terrain. But really what this is doing is essentially taking a slice through the land at any given height. So you'll want to find something that's going to be interesting to you. Quite like this, actually. There's a couple of sort of interesting shape around here, plus a couple of islands. The important thing is to take note of the water level. So here we've got 0.33. And then we're going to export this. So you go to export, then under image, select Heightmap, and we'll overwrite T2 there. And once that's exported, we can go over to Gaea. I'm going to start a new terrain. Gaea is really nice. I really like this new interface. So this is Gaea2, I should say. It's only recently released, and therefore there's a few things that aren't quite working as expected still, but we've got some workarounds. So the first thing is we go to primitive assets and then file, and then we just need to find that height map we just created. And then you can see this rather dramatic looking 3D object. Here's that landmass, that flat spot that I mentioned when we were in Wonderdraft. So this is really quite undesirable for when we're going to erode the terrain later, because that will show as a flat spot. The first thing that we want to do is to have that kind of water level introduced. Now we should, and maybe when you're watching this video, you will be able to do this. We should be able to add in an effects node. So if you drag out, brings up this search bar here. It's actually, we want this adjust node. You can just type FX to bring that in as well. We should be able to clip this, I think, but at the time of recording, this really just doesn't seem to do anything. But it's not a problem. We can instead use a C node and get a kind of similar effect. For the scale of this terrain, I'm going to turn coastal erosion off. I don't really want to have these beaches, especially if we're going to claim that this is an entire continent. And while I'm thinking of it, actually, scale is interesting when you're creating these 3D realistic terrains. I tend to go for an overemphasized scale on the height, particularly for when I'm 3D printing terrains. Because at a whole continent scale, this would essentially just be flat anyway. So it just makes it more visually appealing in my eye. You can go ahead as you know, what looks good for your map. Right, so I said it was important to remember the water level, and then I forgot. So 0.33. We're just going to set this level to roughly the same. So 0.33 here, we have what would be exactly the same. So if I just click this button here, we can bring the 2D viewport. And then as I go back to Wonderdraft, let's just bring that over here. You can see from this top-down view, we've got something that looks pretty much spot on, including these two little islands here, and then these two islands over to the left here. Because we're going to be eroding this terrain, I'm actually going to just drop this down just a tad, just to reveal a bit more of the land mass, to give it a bit more bulk, and that's just going to help make our 3D version more consistent as a top-down view with our final with the 2D input version. Okay, at this point, I want to just jump into Photoshop, just in case you want to have a starting point that is not from Wonderdraft. Let's say you've just got a 2D image of your map. The rest of the workflow after this point will be the same, but just to give you an option, if you are not starting from Wonderdraft, but you still want to just have the general land masses. I will use this example in a future video if you do want to accurately trace all of the mountains and the water features that you have in your 2D map, but that has quite a different workflow in Gaea as well. However, if you do want to just start off with the land masses, then you can follow a similar workflow in Gaea from a 2D map. So essentially, again, we need to have this as a square input. So in Photoshop, at least, and I imagine you can do the same sort of workflow with a free alternative like GIMP. But you want to go to Image and change the canvas size. Here, it's quite a high resolution image of this map. We want to take this width and make the height the same. I find it easier for downstream processing if we kind of set the anchor to the top. So this is just gonna, when I hit OK, it's just gonna expand the map downwards. So when we load this into Gaea, what you'll see is obviously a lot of that kind of square that you load up will just be blank. And we'll just be working with a smaller portion of the square. But then later on down the line, we can change the dimensions of the 3D object once we're in Blender. So I find it easiest to make use of layers here. So remember, with the Heightmap, we want basically a dark color for the lower altitude areas and a lighter color for the higher altitude areas. And because we can rescale once we're in Gaea, I'm just going to use, I'm going to create a solid color layer. And this is going to be the land, so we'll just go for quite a light value. This automatically creates a mask. Currently, this is showing this everywhere, but we want to click on the mask and then invert that. So we can now see our map again. And then this sort of magnetic lasso tool, this is what I've been finding the easiest way to kind of select these objects. It'll take quite a while to do this entire map, so I'm just going to do this island here. This step will be easier if you have a version without kind of the letters and the symbols, but that's not possible, it's not too much of a problem. So we can just click once and then just move your mouse around, tracing the edges. And then what I tend to do if there is some text overhanging, I'll click to just make sure that I've got a anchor point, and then just follow it around. I'm going to do this fairly roughly. You can see it still does quite a good job. This, I guess, is dependent on, you know, the contrast between the sort of your landmass and your water. Let's just do this quite quickly because you'll get the idea. Just tracing this around. And then when you get to here, you can close the loop, and this section will be selected. And then making sure that on the layers, we've got the mask selected. See, everywhere that's black will represent kind of it's transparent, and we want to make this white. So just click this paint bucket symbol, select white, and now you can see that this is all filled in. I've not done a perfect job, but it's okay. Now this is showing white here right now, not because I filled it with white. That's actually just affecting the mask. So this is why I quite like working with layers. If you need to kind of update this at any point later on, you can select your color. I'm not going to do the whole map, but if you kind of continue that sort of workflow, adding the rest of your land, you can then right click, duplicate layer, and we can call this other layer C, and then just invert the mask there. And of course, we also want to change this to a dark color for the Heightmap. So you'll have essentially a black and white image at this point. Export this as a PNG, and then import that into Gaea as your Heightmap instead of the one we created from Wonderdraft. It will automatically be flat because we don't have any variation of color in here at this point, but then you can just rescale as before. Okay, this still is far too tall. So the next thing to do is to drag from this out node. We're just going to add another adjust node. And we're going to clamp this right down. I want to click drop to drop it to the floor. So this goes right down. Another thing we want to do, because of this flat spot here, and I guess just to give us a bit more control over the sort of overall elevation changes that are happening throughout the terrain, I'm actually going to click auto level and equalize. And what this is doing is essentially making this flat on top, or strong as well. There we go. Now it's perfectly flat. And I'm just going to clamp this down even more. If you have it too high up, you end up with huge cliffs all the way around your coastline, and we don't want that. So the next thing to do is to introduce some interest to the terrain. So I'm going to do this with another primitive. So we go to basic, and then I'm going to add a Perlin primitive. We can see here that this texture actually looks quite similar to what we had in Wonderdraft. This kind of random noise is probably what the wizard is creating in the landmass wizard. There is also a landmass brush. Where you have brush marks, you'll often see it, instead of this kind of rough looking terrain, you'll have just complete flat spots again wherever the brush was. That's not an issue because this step will make everything flat anyway. So you know, feel free to kind of paint your terrain how you want it to be in Wonderdraft. Okay, next we want to update the settings for this Perlin node. I think from my testing, I quite liked the ridged variant, and I think taking the scale right down just to kind of get as much going on here as we can. This is something that we can update in a moment, and we'll be able to see what it's doing a bit more easily. So we're going to combine this with the effects node. So you need to drag from the out of the effects node into the out node of the Perlin node. And then we end up with something looking like this. We want to set it to add and the ratio up to 1. And you can see right now we have kind of sort of mess everywhere. This is not what we want. So what we want to do is mask this by adding in a height node. Just clear this up a bit. And we're just going to take this fall off right down, and then just take the range up a bit. So you can see here that it kind of gives you the same value wherever you're going here, but that's because the object that we're looking at obviously has flat sides there. So we'll just put that down here. And so this is now creating a mask. So everything that's white has been selected and everything that's black is not selected. So we'll feed this into the mask. And yeah, we have something now that's looking quite dramatic, but we're going to scale this down now. So these little buttons along the bottom of a lot of these nodes allow you to do some controls. So, so two things we'll probably want to do here is height remap and shaper. So for the shaper, this is kind of affecting the heights of the sort of high points and low points in a different way. Let me just take this down and it will be a bit more obvious. So this is going to help us create more elevation changes in the terrain. So if I now pull this down like this, you can see that actually we're getting some high peaks. And in fact, perhaps this is a bit overly emphasized. So if that's the case, you need to just turn the shaper up a little bit and then height remap down a little bit. Get what feels right for you. I think this looks okay for now. We can come back and change this. And of course, you know, if this sort of generally looks right for you, but you don't like the exact layout of the mountains, for example, just go back to this Perlin mode and you can select a different random seed. It will just mix this up, and then when you combine it, the sort of higher areas will be in a different place. Okay, I think we'll leave part 1 of this tutorial series here. I really just wanted to get to a stage where, whether you've started from Wonderdraft or having to use Photoshop with an existing image of a map, to get to this stage where we've got the kind of the main landmass prepared. And, you know, we can already start to look at kind of the interesting features here and start to think of the effects on world building, you know, the sort of separation of this kind of mountain range here. It's like this nice land bridge through to this island here. Perhaps this is a key area of defense. But yeah, in the future, in the next video, we'll take a look at starting to erode this terrain and get this through to the point where we can get this into Blender and then create a 3D printable object from this starting point. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe for future videos and updates where I can take us through creating the textures, the nice rendered images, and also following the more complicated workflow of if you have a homebrew world where you really want to place every mountain and river in exactly the right place. But for now, I'll see you in the next video.